Region Comprehensive, it's recording, working on the Region 6 Comprehensive Center. And we serve the state departments of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So prior to that, I was in a district as a curriculum director. Prior to that, principal, assistant principal, teacher. So I've been in schools recently and missed that work. And so I look forward to working with you today on this topic that is very, very relevant as we move through this pandemic. So we have a mood meter. And so you're going to choose, can you see the mood meter? There's not like a little box in the way, is there? Okay, all right. So there's a mood meter. You are going to choose just to get us started and for me to kind of read the room. If we were in person, I would be able to you can kind of feel the energy of the room as people are coming in. You can't do that as well in a virtual setting. So this is a way of kind of feeling the room, reading what's happening, how we're feeling as we're coming into this space. So you can choose a color or you can choose a word that describes how you're entering this space right now. And if you will just put that in the chat. So I see inspired, humbled, restless. What other words do we have? Motivated and joyful. That's always great when you're at a conference and that's how you're feeling. Any other words coming up? I'll tell you, I did this satisfied, good. I did this activity with some coaches, some school improvement coaches, and I hit them apparently at a very frustrating time of the week or something, because there were lots of uneasy, frustrated, fuming, nervous, agitated. Those were the words that were coming in, and I was not honestly quite prepared for that. Like I couldn't just say, oh, I'm sorry you all feel terrible. No, let's move on. So we had to address, how are we feeling? Because that's part of SEL instruction, right? That's part of it, even with adults, is that we need to acknowledge how we're feeling as we're moving into a space together. So overall, I see mostly positive thoughts in the chat, and that is a great thing. So inspired was another one I just saw move in. All right. So I don't know if you know it, but today is National Stress Awareness Day. I had no idea when we chose this topic for this day. This just happened to pop up on my Facebook feed last night, that today is National Stress Awareness Day. So what a relevant topic for that day. And so I looked it up, and it's like a national day to bring awareness to stress and what it does to our bodies. So I just thought that was a timely thing that I would add for today as we talk about stress and we talk about resiliency. So our outcomes for today are to reflect on stress and its impact on the body. We also want to explore a stress continuum. So what does it look like from not stressed to overly stressed? Identify some protective factors that support reducing stress, and then brainstorm some ideas for reducing stress and promoting resiliency. We're going to talk about what is resiliency and how do we promote that. So there are some stress zones, and I'm going to talk through these 3 different zones, and then we're going to do something where you kind of place yourself in these different zones. Just hypothetically, we're not going to get you into a dangerous stress zone, but hypothetically. So I'm going to go through these, and then we'll come back together for you to kind of share some thoughts on where you would fit in the stress zone if you were in different situations. So in the comfort zone, that's that green zone in the middle, you feel at ease. If someone were to ask you to do an activity in the comfort zone, you don't experience tension around the request. You believe you have a good understanding of what needs to be done. You feel comfortable doing it. You know how to navigate any occasional rough spots that might come up. Activities in our comfort zone can offer solace when other demands or requests put us in our danger zone, or when we find ourselves spending too much time in the risk zone. So let's talk about the risk zone. That's that yellow circle. In the risk zone, you feel a certain amount of nervous energy. Requests that pull us into our risk zone trigger feelings of slight to moderate stress, but you're still willing to take the risk when you're in the risk zone. You might spend more time on preparation. And before you complete these activities, you might find yourselves thinking about the request while you're doing unrelated tasks, like while you're driving or taking a shower or going for a walk. You might still be thinking about that request that's put you in the risk zone. But when you finish something in the risk zone, there's a sense of accomplishment because you've done like I can do this, like I can do hard things, I can make this happen. Once a risk zone task has been completed, again, there's that sense of accomplishment. And this is where a lot of times learning and growth happen, is in the risk zone when we try new things. Then there's the danger zone. Requests that put us in the danger zone tend to trigger powerful defensiveness, fear, alarm, a strong desire to avoid or escape. Even thinking about these requests and demands so much mental and emotional energy that it's impossible to accomplish anything else when you're in this zone. Picture someone that's alone in the middle of the ocean. All of their energy is spent just keeping their head above water and thinking about how to survive. That's what the danger zone feels like. That's all you can think about. You can't think about anything else. No real learning can occur when the human brain is in the danger zone. So that said, once a person has been able to shift to activities or experiences that are back down into the risk zone or into the comfort zone, they're typically able to process what happened and maybe even learn from the experience, but they can't learn when they're up in that danger zone. And one thing I should have said before I got started was this stress information that we're providing is true of adults and it's true of the children we serve. And so if you're a supervisor of teachers, this is true of your teachers. This is true of you. This is true of parents that walk in your office. If you are a teacher of students, this is true of you and your peers. This is true of your principal. And this is also true of your students, obviously. So this is kind of universal information that can be used. So we are going to go to a site. I'm going to put it in the chat. Okay. If you will go to that site, hopefully you can see mine up there now. Okay. And I have a little note card here. That's mine. I'm going to move it out of the way, actually. If you will go over and make your own note card, which is, yep, you just click on this little note card thing down here, and then you're going to move it. I just moved somebody's, and you're going to type your name on it. So I see Frederica has made a card and typed her name. You can make a sticky note. You can make a card. It doesn't matter. You can change the color of your card if you want to personalize it. These are all options. Once you get a card, you can either put it in one of the zones or you can put it off to the side so that your card's not on top of someone else's. You should have about 14 cards, so I'll wait just a minute. So while people are making their cards, if we were in person, you would have a sticky note or something that you could walk up and put up there. It would be our active engagement piece. But here we are. And so we're going to do this virtually. So I'm going to read a scenario or say a scenario, and you are going to move your card to either the comfort zone, which is over on the left, the risk zone, which is in the middle, or that danger zone, that red zone that we talked about, which is on the right. Wait one more minute. Still see some cards coming in. Okay, so let's say you are asked to sing in front of your students. Sing a song in front of students. Is that a comfort for you? Is that a risk? Like, I'm not sure about that. I can do it, but is that a danger? Like, that makes me very uncomfortable. Move your card. Very good. Okay, what if you were asked to sing in front of your peers? Some people are more comfortable in front of their peers than their students. And for some, it moves the other way, right? Some of you still are good. You're in the risk zone. That's not your favorite thing to do, but okay. All right. What if you were to try a new recipe with guests that were coming to your house? Recipe you never tried before, guests coming to your house for dinner. Yeah, so I'm not a very good cook. And so every recipe is like a new recipe. So I'd be in that green zone too, because like I'm always trying something new because I'm just not very good at any of it. So it is what it is, right? Like you can't be picky if you're coming to my house. What if I left my list at home. I had a whole list of questions and I can see now that I don't have them with me. So that's okay. I'm going off the top of my head. What if you were going to a new country that you didn't know the language of, and you were going to spend 10 days in a country that you didn't know the language? Totally comfortable, risk, or that gives you anxiety, danger? Okay, you can see we're kind of all over the map on that, right? And that may go back to your experiences too. Like those of you that have experienced that before may go, oh, I've done that. That wasn't so bad. And those of you that have never experienced that, that might be intimidating and scary to you. What if you were asked to pick up a harmless, like garden variety snake that was in the yard? Harmless little dude. Yeah, I'm like over here, like way on the red zone. That's not going to work for me. Isn't that interesting though, that either we're cool with it or I'm not doing that. What about a roller coaster that goes upside down? Okay. What about talking about politics with someone you know is not in the same place as you are? Okay. What if you witnessed a car accident? Again, that may go back to experience too. If it's something you've experienced, that may trigger something for you, right? So that could be difficult. It all depends on your experience. Okay, we are going to move out of that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And hopefully we're back to the PowerPoint. So why would we do an activity like this? And is this something you could do with your staff? And if you can unmute, you can put it in the chat. Why is it helpful for us to share ideas like that?
Hi there, this is Michael. I think this would be a good kind of norming and grounding activity just to feel where you are. And, you could start like things in the room right now and then move to other experiences. It just kind of reminds you of your comfort level and to see that everybody's not on the same page and has different experiences. And I'd be totally comfortable doing that with staff. We have a good group here and they'll share.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Or what about with students? Would anybody consider doing that with students?
It would be good to do with your students, especially if you have like maybe advisory or something like that group that you're working with. That would be a good way to kind of gauge where they are. So I think that would be a good idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you get to know a little bit more about your kids, right? Like, and we're always looking for different ways to find information about our kids. So definitely. What does this tell us about learning? I think I already kind of addressed that when we're in that red zone, no new learning can happen. It is not physically possible. The brain will not let new information in when it's in that fight or flight mode. And so we have to be aware of that with our staff and with our students. I can remember as a principal, sending a teacher home because it's like, not only are you not going to be effective today with your students, but you're not able to receive information, and that's okay. Like that's just where you are today, but let's try again tomorrow. Those are hard conversations to have, but things that need to happen. Did anyone never step into the danger zone? Was there anybody in this group that like stayed out of danger the whole time you were yellow or green? Okay, all right. I think all of us moved over there at some point. So the question would be, what situation would put you in red? If none of those put you in red, what would be something that puts you in the red zone? And for some people, maybe that have experienced a lot of trauma or a lot of things, sometimes they're a little bit, could be desensitized to some things too. And so that's information too. So just food for thought there. So our body has a stress response system, and this is not news to you. You know this, but I'm just going to spend 30 seconds on it. That your body, when you're in those different zones, it reacts differently. So your brain's triggering the production of cortisol, and that affects multiple systems in your body that prepares you to fight or to flight or to freeze. But also remember that occasional stress is good for you. If we didn't have any stress at all, then that's not a great thing either. Our body kind of needs that checks and balance sometimes to keep us going. And some of you actually may enjoy like the exhilaration of like a roller coaster or bungee jumping, or and your body is definitely in a stress mode at that moment. And some of you, that's kind of exciting. Whereas for other people, that is not exciting at all and not something they want to do ever. So that's just, we're all just made differently. And how our body reacts to that stress system is all very different too. And I meant to have this out in front of me. There is a book. Here it is. It's called The Body Keeps Score. If you've never seen The Body Keeps Score, it is fantastic. Did I hear somebody say something? Might have just been on mute. Fantastic book about how your body reacts and how your body truly keeps score of, especially when there's chronic stress or PTSD, those types of things. Your body remembers those incidents and hangs on to them and reacts certain ways. And it just helped me understand a lot about some of the students we work with and how triggering some things can be when we know, so, well, we just did this. And you may not think about how you just doing that one thing is what set that student off. So The Body Keeps Score is the name of that book. So there are different types of stress. We talked about zones of stress, but there's also different types of stress. There's positive stress, which is moderate, brief, normal. Getting ready for a presentation, you have a normal positive stress. It's not something that is taxing. It's not something that you're losing sleep over, but it's just a little bit of pressure that kind of keeps you on your A game. Then there's tolerable stress, and those are events that can alter the brain negatively, but they occur infrequently. So that could be like the death of a loved one and an unexpected crisis in your family. I'm thinking when Hurricane Matthew came through, it flooded out our whole basement that we had just redone. And it was a tolerable stress. It was stressful. We lost sleep, we had work to do, but we got over it, right? And with time, we fixed everything and everything was okay. And then there's toxic stress. And toxic stress is strong, frequent activation of that stress response. A lot of times that can be due to chronic neglect, to violence, to disaster, to trauma. But also I don't want to kind of negate the fact that toxic stress can be from being in that stress state all the time. If you're in a stressed state at work all the time, that becomes toxic stress because your body never lets up, which again, we'll talk a little bit about here in a minute. So those different types of stress that we talked about have a continuum as well. And that continuum that we will see has 4 different stages. So ready is you're not stress-free, but you're mastering the stress that kind of comes with life. You have good coping skills, you can handle it, things bounce off of you. Reacting to stress is reacting to those normal stressors, but we'll talk about in a minute that it doesn't feel as good. It starts to feel a little out of control, but it's mild, it's reversible. You can go back to the ready zone. It's fixable. It's just there and it's a little uncomfortable. And then there's injured on a continuum. And if you think about if your body is injured, stress can do that too, right? Like if I tweaked my ankle or cut my arm, or I would have an injury that I could heal by myself or with help from friends and family. I don't need to go seek medical help, but it may take a while. It may take a while to heal. It may take some self-care. It may take some extra bandages, whatever. But it can heal. And then there's illness. And so stress on the continuum of illness is that injury that you had that doesn't heal, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And if you think about, like, if you've ever had a kid that had a cold and then suddenly a couple days later you're like, oh, I think it's moved into their chest. Oh, I think I need to take them in, right? And then you take them in and they're like, oh, they have pneumonia. And, it just escalates very quickly, right? Well, that can happen with stress too. That if we don't take care of it and we don't take care of ourselves and get help from people around us, it can turn into that illness that can be diagnosed by a professional. So this next slide kind of continues on that. And this work, this stressed first aid continuum was first developed by the US Navy and Marine Corps. And it was a grant from the Department of Defense. And so that kind of tells you where it comes from. And that helps, I think for me, that helps me remember that stress happens to everybody. I mean, it happens to our military, it happens to our teachers, it happens to our students. It's just a part of life. But we have to understand how to deal with it. So the features of each of these continuums, I've talked a lot about the green zone, ready to go, mentally, physically fit, you're ready to go. You're ready to tackle the world. Nothing can stop you. If something does, you react accordingly. But then you can move into that yellow zone where you might feel irritable, anxious, down. You might lose motivation or lose focus. Might have difficulty sleeping because those things keep popping up that are reminding you of the stressors in your life. And there's muscle tension, and it's just not as fun to be in that yellow zone. And then that orange zone is that injury that we talked about. So might feel a loss of control, some panic, rage, depression. Substance abuse sometimes creeps in here because that's that self-medicating, not feeling like your normal self, guilt, shame, diminished sense of purpose. And I know you can see this happen in students where they start off green, maybe something happens that moves them into orange. And then how are we going to get them back to green is the question, because we don't want to go into the red zone where the symptoms persist. They're not getting any better. They're getting worse and really not able to function. Once you get to the red zone, just like if you had a stomach virus and you were ill and you weren't able to function, we can't function when our bodies are in this red zone of stress. So thinking about the pandemic, I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, not that it's not relevant, it's incredibly relevant, but it really is a lot about changing our expectations of what we can and can't do. And I think the hard part of 2021 has been that teachers and administrators have been expected to carry on as if nothing changed, but we all know the world has changed. And so that has made it very difficult for us to manage the stress of, but wait a minute, things are different, but I'm still being held to the same expectations. And really the goal of each of these zones is to get to the zone before you. So if you're in the red zone, how can I get to the orange zone? How can I get to the yellow zone? How can I get back to that green? Of course, you could skip backwards, but that's the goal. And that's what we want for students too. So resilience is something we're going to talk about here in a minute. And so green zone things that move us back to that green zone. I'm going to kind of skip ahead here to the, if we're in the injured or the illness zone, getting help with setting boundaries and routines. When we get into that orange and red zone, a lot of times we can't handle it ourselves anymore. And I know, like for me, when I start working late at night, I never turn off. I'm kind of on that marathon hamster wheel. It's my husband who'll say, oh, you're working again late tonight. And it's just that little boundary setting that helps me kind of, okay, like, this is supposed to be our time. This is supposed to be when I'm with family. That's a boundary setting that's very helpful. Building tiny health habits. It seems simple, but it's hard to do when you're in that chronic stress, to take care of yourself, to go for a walk, to eat the right foods, to drink your water. All of those things seem, kind of simple and kind of like something that we've all heard before, but a lot of times we neglect to do it when we're in that state. So this next piece, actually, before I get to that piece, I want to back up and just ask the question, and you can unmute. Where do we think we see our students at this point? A lot of our students, when we think about our alternative learning programs, Our students that are coming into us, are we seeing them in red, green, yellow, orange? Where do you see most of your students falling when they come in? So I see in the chat, orange, yellow, mostly yellow, orange, definitely yellow, definitely. And I would argue sometimes maybe in the red, but not, they don't have the care they need, right? Like they don't have the medical assistance or the mental diagnosis that they might need in order to get down to orange or yellow or green. So absolutely, I think we deal with a lot of students with a lot of trauma. I know that. And so although it seems like we're simplifying it, it's not simple. I know it's not simple. It's tough work, and it's stressful on you. And I think that's part of my message today too, is that you can't pour from an empty cup. And so these things apply to you as well as the educators of the room. So this chart has a lot to do with stress zones again. And we want to focus on that stretch zone, which is in the middle. And that's where the most learning and the most growth happens for adults and for students. But before we get to that stress or that stretch zone in the middle, think about that zone on the left, which is called bore out. And if you've ever had a student in bore out zone, I don't know many teachers that live there because they're just so busy going, and they're always challenged. So I don't know many adults that are in bore out, although it could happen, but I do know students that have been in this zone. It's when someone is missing motivational forces. They have no reason to do anything. Imagine just drifting aimlessly, completely bored. It could be fun to do nothing for a while, but sitting watching TV in your pajamas all day, every day is not good for your performance. And eventually it gets old. And I saw this with my own high schooler during the pandemic. She had maybe a half hour to an hour's worth of work a day. And she got bored. Like, it was fun at first. She was making cake pops and laying out in the hammock, and she was living her best life. But then after like a week or two, that wasn't fun anymore. Like, she was missing that motivation and that lack of drive and desire to do things. Everyone needs a minimum amount of pressure to motivate themselves. If a task is too easy, or there are no targets or deadlines or expectations, then your performance will usually be poor. So we rarely get much done if we don't have a goal. So the signs of bore out are demotivation, disengagement, lethargy, insomnia, anxiety, depression. Those are just as hurtful as on the flip side of that burnout zone. And then we move into comfort. So moving out of burnout or bore out, there's this transition into comfort. And really you could describe that as, these things are easy. I can do these things. They don't stress me out. But you know what? They don't really stretch you either. So sometimes I've seen teachers kind of in that comfort zone that are just kind of cruising along, that maybe need a little push into the stretch zone to get into their optimal performance. So the comfort zone is not a bad thing. You don't want to live in the stretch zone forever. So falling back into that comfort zone can be a good thing, but you also don't want to live in the comfort zone forever, because then we're not growing and learning. That stretch zone, there are two crucial reasons that everyone needs to stretch. One, because peak performance happens when you stretch. And two, because you can't grow unless you're stretched. If you're doing the same thing every day, then there's no growth occurring. So taking yourself out of that comfort zone, putting you into that stretch zone, it's akin to being like in a flow state. If you know about being in a flow state, you're just kind of moving and grooving, and you've got things going, and you really feel like you're fully utilizing yourself. You're using all your gifts and talents when you hit that stretch zone. This is also where our adrenaline and cortisol can kick in a good way. They can kick in to help us get to that optimal zone. And then we get to strain. Strain is when you've been in the stretch zone for too long. And this, I think, may be where some of us are due to the pandemic. We've been stretched for so long that now we're into strain. The pressure's increased. You don't have time to recover. And what happens is when you enter this strain zone, the pressure just becomes too high. For a while, it may feel like, oh, look at me. Like now I'm even rocking and rolling further than I was in the stretch zone. But eventually mistakes are going to start happening. The stress symptoms will start developing, frustration might happen, anxiety, poor concentration, all these things start to happen in the strain zone. And then finally, there's the burnout zone, which unfortunately, I do think we have that happening in some places too. And when pressure is very high and sustained, you enter the dangerous burnout zone. You'll experience exhaustion, chronic stress. Your body perpetually draws on its survival mechanisms, and it begins fight or flight. And that can happen, I mean, even at work, just feeling tense and feeling uptight is obviously not productive for anyone. Adrenaline and cortisol are now running the show. They kind of take over once you get into that burnout zone. And in the short term, the symptoms may not cause lasting harm, but in the long term, the stress can take a terrible toll on the body. And that book I showed you earlier really explains that very well. It could be gastrointestinal disorders, heart disease, immunosuppression. All these things can come up when we're in that burnout zone. And finally, there's this at the top right, you'll see the zone of delusion. I think I've been in the zone of delusion before. And the zone of delusion is when you really think you're like rocking and rolling and you think you've got it going, but when you look back, really you kind of have a false vision of what you were able to do. Rather than getting bigger and better and doing more things, the pressure has really gotten to you and you may lose focus. You may frantically multitask and make mistakes. The quality of your work suffers. When we're on that hamster wheel all the time, sometimes we get into that zone of delusion that I'm not going to die. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I know I'm exhausted. I know I'm stressed, but this is what I have to do. That's that zone of delusion. So administrators should be aware of their own tendencies to enter the zone of delusion, but also look out for it in your team members and your teachers. Staff may say they're working effectively, but actually have declining performance. And administrators at that point need to step in and ensure that they take measures to scale things down when possible. And I know that's much easier said than done. I know that for a fact. Much easier said than done for lots of different reasons. So where do some of our educator peers or maybe even ourselves fall on this continuum? I'm going to open it up just for you to discuss within the group. I was going to do a breakout, but I think we'll just talk within the group. Where do we fall within that continuum? And I'll put it back up. What are you seeing in your buildings? Either in yourself, in your peers, in teachers you work with?
I would say there's that stretch, but I do feel like that for some of my peers that sometimes that falls more in the burnout. I know that at the beginning of the school year, it definitely felt like that. Felt like we were dealing with more of the same from last year, which was a hard place with the number of students wanting to be virtual. That definitely caused a strain. And looking at our numbers, I know that that really caused a strain. I would say that we were going towards burnout and we moved back to strain and now back over to stretching with making those adjustments like what you talk about with boundaries and putting things in place. So right now, I would say we were somewhere in between stretch. And so I think it's something that you have to kind of monitor all the time, like to make sure that you don't start going over into the danger zone. Because if we're too stretched, then we're not performing at our best at anything, and that helps no one. It's always like I'm telling, we're having conversations. We're supposed to be moving kids to a better place where they can get more skills, but if we're moving them to a place of more of the same, then that's not really helpful. So it's really important for us as educators and people that are working that we be very careful of that. If we're overstretched and we're at burnout, we're not really helping the children, even if we do have an alternative environment for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. Absolutely. And I love that you have recognized that burnout zone and have, said we took steps, we had to do something. So we took steps to move back to strain and then back to stretch. Building leaders, that's one of your main goals, is to feel the building and to know what can we do to move from burnout to strain? How can I help people? And I was thinking as I was like, getting ready for this presentation of when I was a principal, I wish I'd had a conversation with XYZ teacher, because now that I look back, that teacher was in burnout. And I knew it, but I didn't quite put my finger on it, or maybe didn't feel like it was my place to say so. But those crucial conversations are important, really important as building leaders. Okay, so we've spent all this time talking about stress and we're like running out of time. We haven't talked about the really good stuff, which is resiliency. So resiliency is how do we recover from all the stress? And I feel like it's important that you are able to define stress and maybe even define it for other people. And that's why we spend so much time on it. The resiliency piece of it is really about your connections and your relationships and your ability to set boundaries, which we just heard. So there are risk factors and there are protective factors when we're thinking about resiliency. So those risk factors we know are things that decrease our ability to be resilient. Things like loss of a loved one, trauma, grief, lack of social skills. When we think about students that don't have adequate social skills, that's a risk factor because they're not able to make the connections to have those protective factors that we'll talk about in a minute. Isolation, which was huge during the pandemic, all risk factors that increase our stress as opposed to decrease. Whereas those protective factors that help pull us back in, help pull us out of burnout or pull us out of that orange zone and back down to the yellow zone, are self-care, coping skills, a sense of belonging, authentic relationships, and academic and professional engagement. So think about your classrooms, those classrooms that are the most productive, that have, you just, when you walk in, you can feel it. A lot of times it's because that educator has put a priority on coping skills for students, on everybody feeling as though they belong, and on that academic and professional engagement. It's an engaging classroom when you walk in, I guarantee, and everyone feels like they belong. Kind of like Jacinda said yesterday, where everybody wants to know your name, right? That's part of those protective factors. So we want to make sure that our protective factors outweigh our risk factors. And again, that's true of students and staff. We want to make sure that they have those protective factors so that they're more likely to be resilient and not fall into that orange and red zone as frequently or at all, hopefully. But when we find that the risk factors are greater than the protective factors, that's when a child or an adult is at risk for those stress zones that we talked about. So the research says that teachers who promote resilience and provide and model 3 protective factors. There's 3 protective factors that are most important for teachers who promote resilience, and that's having those caring relationships, positive and high expectations, and opportunities to participate and contribute. So just feeling like you belong, having relationships, and being held accountable. Those are the things that build resiliency in children. And that's what the research tells us, and I wish I had a silver bullet for like, now we've talked about all these, stressful things. If you just do this, it will get better. Like, it's not that easy. If it were, I would be a millionaire, but it's not that easy. It's really about these kind of hard work things of making relationships and having expectations and holding kids accountable. So we have 2 minutes. I'm actually going to skip that question because we only have 2 minutes left. We're going to do a little bit of a brain dump. And so in the chat, you're going to dump any ideas that are crawling around inside your head. So anything that you're like, I want to read more about that, or I need to think more on that, or there's a teacher that kind of brings to mind for me. Dump any questions you have, or dump any new knowledge that you want to continue to think on. So you can put multiple answers in the chat. You're just dumping out what you're thinking about right now, and there's no right or wrong answer here. So it's just your continuous stream of thought, and I'll be quiet for just 1 minute. Yes, okay. So we have one in the chat that says, the student I just met with was struggling coping. The student's birthday is this week, struggling because the grandmother recently passed away and the student is realizing the birthday can't be celebrated with grandmother. The student is having anger issues and grades are failing. So thinking about those risk factors and protective factors, thinking about those zones of stress, that student's probably in kind of an orange area. There's trauma, things have happened. And so what are we going to do? What relationships can we build? What connections can we make to move them? Definitely. What else are we thinking about? Think about responses to those with observable stress symptoms, but also what I need others to say to me when they observe symptoms of stress. Absolutely. We need folks to hold us accountable so we don't run ourselves into the ground because it's easy to do so. Support for one of the students that is an illegal immigrant, what kind of services to help? Absolutely. Talk about stress, right? And that student needs support. And so that's awesome that you're thinking about them. So we hope that the presentation is helpful in, and you can continue to dump ideas, is helpful in kind of setting stress in a context and giving you information about different zones of stress so that it's not just, oh, that person is stressed, but instead you can start to see some warning signs and start to think about, well, what can we do to help that person? Because it just takes one person to help another. It doesn't have to be a major coordinated effort. It can just be one person reaching out and making that connection. So I hope that you've been able to kind of walk away realizing those zones of stress, realizing that resiliency matters, that relationships matter, and that the work that you're doing every day is just critical. And I can't thank you all enough for all that you're doing for our students every day. So if you have questions, I think I have my contact information. I'm again at the Serve Center, but you're welcome to email me and I'll be happy to help in any way I can. So if there's any questions, I can take them. I'm 1 minute over, I'm sorry.